hi. I'm Matt Lighty, and we're talking about Abyss stuff today. I just saw... Oh, there's a man next to me. Look at him go. I was looking at some builds, and I saw a couple guys using individual Abyss uniques, but I've always liked the idea, although it's not traditionally that good, to use like the full suite of Abyss uniques, and that's partially because the amount of socket pressure you undergo by replacing traditional sockets for gems with Abyss sockets, which could obviously only be used by Abyss gems, jewels, apologies, but it can be used with a unique Abyss jewels, which there are a variety of 4, and then just traditional Abyss jewels, which the value of those are quite high, but they do depend on how you craft them and what they do. Also, there's ways to get 6-socket corrupted ones. They can have synthesis modifiers, they can have corruption implicits. The Abyss jewels have pretty high value, I would say, across the board, and stacking them to certain degrees can, you know, get yourself some goodies. A lot of Abyss jewels are pretty good for stacking flat amounts of a damage to attacks. A little bit less so for spells, and typically it's elemental because there's just a bigger suite of rolls. Between lightning, fire, and cold, you can kind of add a ton of flat to something that traditionally might not have a lot of damage. But like we talked about, you're under some socket pressure. So you're looking at the Abyss body armor, Shroud of the Lightless. You have a couple variations as far as sockets amounts, but traditionally I would say using a 2-socket, and you're probably going to have a 4-link in there. Now you could do an offensive setup, some sort of something on a 4-link. However, a popular alternative that people tend to use, more commonly so in trade, is using a Shaper Elder main hand, or a main hand that has some sort of additional socket support, and then a squire in the offhand. So here's an example of a wand that has a supported by critical strikes. So, you know, obviously you can't use like awakened variations as socketed supports, but there's like a lot of cool things you could do when it comes to getting these. And this is like a legacy whatever one, that doesn't matter. It's more just the fact that if you get a Shaper wand, you could roll things like supported by, which then lends you with 1, 2, 3 links, maybe 1 or 2 for the socket, whatever. Then Squire adds the socketed supports, also support your main hand, so 4, 5, 6. You could take this to a ridiculous amount of things like, you know, 6 rolls plus the 3, and then 3, and end up with like an 11 link. But we'll just leave it at the very basic version of like, maybe this is an 8 or a 9 in total. So you have something like, there's your 6 link, what would be in your body, but now it's in your weapons because you're using Shroud of the Lightless, or in a more extreme scenario, you could use Replica Shroud of the Lightless, which I would say typically is a little bit overkill, because when you're stacking Abyss jewels to this degree, what's the difference between 4 extra more? It's like, is it worth not having the benefit of Shroud of the Lightless, where this thing gives you a very large amount of stacking life, penetration, or mana per Abyss jewel socketing you, affecting you. So not just socketed ones, but affecting you in total. So you can just start to do some latent math. We'll just say like on your passive tree, you have maybe 6 or 7 jewel sockets. Okay, so 6 or 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. You could easily get to 20. So 20 Abyss jewels, and some of these values start to get a little bit crazy, right? And that's just looking at the Shroud of the Lightless. It does other things, but for the most part, you're looking at the percentage scaling, the penetration, so that's elemental penetration specifically, which is nice because we already talked about Abyss jewels being really, really good for stacking things like elemental damage. So things like a Murderous Eye is your traditional-ish attack stacking elemental thing. So say I'm playing, you know, using a dagger or whatever, you can get a large amount of flat. Pretty decent values, you know, that's like 26-ish average cold flat in the top end there. You know, same thing fire, same thing with lightning. You can get those times 20. You're talking obviously a ridiculous amount of flat you could obtain a Murderous Eye. Not to mention when you're using things like your Atlas tree setup, the corrupted gaze on your Atlas tree, shouts out to the gaze, it's June, Pride Month. Corrupted gaze lets you get 5 or 6 random corrupted modifiers and jewels, so sometimes you'll even have things that maybe have 4 or 5 offensive rolls. Now obviously your trade, you just purchase them and they're crazy expensive to get a large amount of them, especially 20. But you could kind of start to see how that would get a little bit wonky. Now, we briefly touched on the unique ones, of which there are 4. These are actually named after most of the known liches, so Ulamon and amanananananannu. Those are the 2 main ones you kill in the depths. And then you have Tekrod, who's never actually been fought but is known. And then Kurgle, which is kind of, I think, also not known, but there's oh, I just dropped a screwdriver. His reference is true. 2, True. References to. So like there's also, you know, you've the 2 liches in the depths and you've one in the delve. So like that's kind of like some fun little lore there. I did a lore post about Abyss liches a while ago, but honestly most of it's left my mind as I have, you know, my memory is like fingerprints in an abandoned handrail. It's just fading by the hour. But I digress. So things like Tech Rods gives you a bunch of main hand offensive crit. Things like Kurgel's Gaze gives you a souped up arcane surge. Ulamons gives you something regarding projectile chaining bouncing off of collision with colliding terrain, and Amanus gives you dot multi for minions. So this one's less useful, but the Tech Rod one's really nice for like attack builds, I guess, and then the Kurgel's is like more castery. But there's no reason not to use them. And then, you know, each of the Abyss uniques does different things for stacking ones. Like a Tombfist is one that gives you whatever, depending on your socket, it can do 1 or 2 different little buffs. There's a whole page of them, and they do different things, but this one's Intimidate and Maim, but you can get things like, what are the other options? So we have Blind, Fortify, Intimidate, Maim, Onslaught on Kill, and Rage on Hit. So you can get some fun combinations there. I think you can only have 1 of each, like 1 Searching, 1 Murderous. Also a secondary glove that's kind of like more castery. That's the Command of the Pit. These are found in Delve versus an Abyssal Depth through Abyss League. Same with the Hail Negator, is also off the same Abyss boss in the Delving. But yeah, this one's kind of weird. It has to do with minion accuracy, but then the Arcane Surge on hit's kind of nice. In a way, it kind of, you know, comes in conjunction with Kurgel's there. So you have Kurgel's Gaze and then Command of the Pit are like kind of related-esque. These can also roll 2 sockets, but in most scenarios, for every roughly 50 that drop with 1 socket, it drops with an additional socket as like a rare variation. So 1 sockets are very common, 2 sockets are much more rare. Hail Negator, being the helmet, lets you recover a bunch of life when you're losing spirit charges, and you lose the charges when you take a savage hit, which is a hit that does, I think it's a third of your life. Does it actually say? No, it's 15% of your life is a savage hit. So you're gaining charges every second. Your max charge count is based off the amount of abyssal jewels affecting you. So 20 max charges, 20 times 360. So if this is a perfect roll, every time you get hit for at least 15% life, you would be regaining 60% ES and life, whatever your total capacity would be. So that's kind of cool. There's no, you know, way of gaining spirit charges faster than 1 a second. So it's kind of like you have a 3% life regen a second, but it's like delayed and stacked up. So that's the one helm variation, but the much more popular one, which in a weird way sparked the idea of looking at this video in general in conjunction with the build thing. I did see a Reddit post regarding on the front page people mentioning, hey, can we get Lightpoacher revert the nerf and make it a chase unique again, which was kind of interesting since Lightpoacher is a very fun unique. This is the other helmet, the much more popular one. Has a very similar setup of skills when it comes to spirit charges, but this one does give you spirit charges on kill. For what I can see here, there's no internal cooldown on that, so you gain a lot of charges really fast. And then the fun part is you do actually gain 5% fizz as extra damage for each element per spirit charge. So of each element means cold, fire, lightning. That's a lot of extra damage, you know, per spirit charge, but you trigger level 20 spirit burst when you use the skill while you have a spirit charge. So it's dispersing the spirit charges in a similar fashion of you gaining them. And the spirit burst is something you could hook up with like GMP and Awaken Fork are 2 common ones, and it shoots out a large array of green projectile. We can actually go back to the video from the Reddit post and you could show what that looks like. Guycheck is a guy I know from Twitch chat. I've seen his name before, but this is basically what it looks like as you're just shooting out these little green projectiles. So imagine that with, you know, Awakened Fork or Awakened Chain, and it gets really fun. I don't really need too many supports, but some people do run 1-socket Lightpoachers, so I can have a 3rd support on Spirit Burst. Not sure if it's really worth it. It's kind of more preference, but yeah. Anywho, Darkness Enthroned. I saw that I had a 69% one, so that's the one I tossed on there. But this is a very, very, very common belt that's used. It becomes way better when you have one that's really high percent, and people oftentimes, I would say, use these for getting things like their avoids capped out. So you have like a Murderous Eye, for example. I'm just going to roll this one pretty quickly with something. Oh, perfect. So say you have a 46% avoid chance to be shocked, right? So if I think it shows in miscellaneous. So if I pop this bad boy in there, you can see I have a 46% chance to avoid shock. Now the scaling increase of Darkness Enthroned means I put it in my belt. It's now a 77%. So you can kind of do the math here. If this was a 50% chance to avoid being shocked and my belt was 100% increased, it doubles all the values, meaning you can, with 1 jewel, get the value of 2 jewels, so it's extra nice for things like avoid getting shocked. Avoid getting shocked is extra relevant because a lot of people run Storm Shroud, so when you have that 100% chance to avoid being shocked, pop this bad boy in there, I now have that same amount of percent chance to avoid being ignited, chilled, frozen, yada yada yada. It applies to all your elemental ammo. So there's some fun things you could do when it comes to, comes to that. So Darkness Enthroned is definitely a winner. Tombfist is a little bit less so because it's just more specific and it just doesn't have as much value. And the boots are weird. So these are Bubonic Trails. These are old Bubonic Trails. I tried to divine them to see if they could become new Bubonic Trails, but they didn't. And that's just unfortunate because that's what I have now. Waste of a divine. You can take a look at these on the wiki, but they're actually pretty fucking slick now. So these give you Death Walk when equipped, which is very unimportant. The really main thing is the fact that they have upwards of 24% increased reservation, which is your aura reservation efficacy, of skills while affected by unique abyss jewel, which we went over. There's a couple unique abyss jewels, and the better ones I would say are tech rods and Kurgles for maybe like builds that are self-attacking or self-casting. Amanus is more for minions, and Ulamons I think was really strictly running like Sanctum and weird kind of ZHP niche build. Bubonic Trail gives you it's just not common to get reservation efficacy, so it's just funny when you get a large amount of that on you. And the other one being reduced duration of ailments is kind of whatever, because I don't want to have a less duration of something on me. I don't want to have it on me, which is why having ailment immunity is always just more important. You typically don't care about that, and more you care about the fact you can get 32 movement speed, which is pretty slick. Now, back to Death Walk, which is the thing we have on the Bubonic Trails. All it really does is it blows up corpses you walk by. I have never seen this really being used as a way to do anything of importance. It's a 5% detonation on nearby corpses. It doesn't really matter. I think it's kind of just not an important part of the boot. The important part is it has 2 Abyss sockets, 30 move speed, and 24% reservation efficacy. So you've got like all your Abyss uniques. We know that Abyss jewels are great for stacking flat. You could run a bunch of these, and you could use things like a squire to kind of circumvent the downside of not having too many sockets available and alleviate some of the socket pressure. So are there any kind of funky builds and fun things people are doing that at least you could enjoy with such a setup? Now, you could just do Abyss and Solo Self-Found and you'll be able to get yourself most of these uniques, I would say, without too much difficulty. The drop rates are a little bit fucky. The overworld Abyss uniques drop off of Amanu and Ulamon like we talked about, but the drop rates are not great. You can see the base rate to get something like a Lightpoacher is 29%, but the chance to get a 2-socket one being 1%, meaning roughly 1 in 30 Lightpoachers will be 2-socket. It gets very similar for Shroud of the Lightless, but when the base rate is a 3% drop, hitting a 0.13 socket Shroud of the Lightless is a lot worse. So a third of the time you're going to get one of the base Abyss uniques, and then an infinitesimally shit amount of the time you're going to get the 2-socket ones, which are the much more desirable ones. Thankfully, they've changed the wording on almost every single Abyss unique to say, not while socketed, but while affected by, which means for most of them, you don't actually have to have the thing in the unique, you just have to be running that type of Abyss Jewel. So for Bubonic Trail, you don't have to actually have a Magic Abyss Jewel in the boots, you just have to have them on your character, which is so much better. In the case of Tombfist, it's the opposite, still the old wording. While a thing is socketed, then you get the bonus. It's just a little bit more annoying, but it's also the one that people typically don't run as Tombfist. So if you want to go whole hog onto Abyss on Atlas Passage Tree, you definitely can and play a build that farms out all these Abyss uniques, at least 1 socket variant, maybe working towards 2 sockets. And it shouldn't be that bad because Abyss depths always lead to liches now, and it's just not that uncommon to fight a lich. So now that we've seen there's a fun variety of Abyss socket uniques and Abyss jewels, and we know what they do, let's take a brief look at least what people were doing in the past year and see if anything stands out as being like extra spicy. Obviously getting a squire is very expensive, and so is something like Replica, Shroud of the Lightless in trade. In Solo Self-Found, the squire is less important, I would say, than the Shroud, because you could always use a 2-hand build or like a bow, and you're back at having a really accessible 6-link, and staffs aren't bad either, so you don't necessarily need to run any of the fancy shit. You could just run the basic kind of stuff and then just have a ton of these. And actually a good thing to mention, because we're talking about solo self-found, the best way I would say, in my experience, this is an unfortunate game state issue, but the best way to get Abyss jewels that you want are I-84, because you want them to be I-84 so they could roll proper things, at least 84 or higher, is Expedition. Now, it's actually totally fine to run Expedition alongside of Abyss. They're not like conflicting things for the most part, and your Atlas tree has enough points, although they're both like point grubblers, especially Abyss is like a 40-point Atlas tree. You could just do them no problem, but Tujin is the way to go. And you want to wait till you get to level 90, I think 91 is when the shop starts selling I-84 to 86 items, but they sell so many. So I'm going to do like, well, we'll do 13 rerolls here, and we'll see how many Abyss jewels we get. Don't forget, when you're also Tujining, the way I do it, I think it's been the easiest way I've ever seen it, is when you're trying to like haggle for something, what I recommend is you just left-click on the item, and then you scroll wheel until you get about halfway down. So I left-click, I just do a big chunk of a scroll wheel like that, and then I purchase, and I double-click. And he's always going to put, if he rejects the first offer, he's always going to put the second offer within bracket of like somewhere in the middle. So if I click it again and he said no, it'll be the top. I just scroll wheel down again, and then you just double click and he's going to sell it to you. And it's like, I don't want to have to haggle with two hands, you know, which is like extra fucking lazy, I understand. But I like to just haggle, you know, with one hand. So my left hand can be on my cock and balls and I could just be sitting here rolling my shit up and down. Okay, so we finished our Tujining, and in 13 we got 6. So you could, with an incredibly small sample size, you could say, oh, half of the time you'll see an Abyss jewel. You check their eye levels, they're all going to be 84 to 86, which is perfect. And that way you could just craft them up to your liking. When it comes to crafting, yeah, I mean, technically you could harvest and stuff, but honestly, their pool is not that big. And since we're going for things like LE damage, like say with bows, I typically just chaos spam, and then if you hit a couple things that are like tier 2 rolls, I'm like happy enough. Like this one, for example, is perfectly acceptable. High lightning, low cold, you know, crit multi-res, that's good. Now do that 20 times and you've got yourself a bow build. So yeah, that's how I would go about getting the jewels themselves. Tujin after your character's level like a 90-ish is probably the way to go. I guess I hit stop recording right after I just said this, and I thought that I wasn't recording the whole time, and I was about to fucking jump off my goddamn roof because I was like, I just rambled for 20 minutes and I didn't even record. I would have flipped my absolute shit. Okay, so looking at the amount of people who are using the core 4, I would say Bubonic Trail, Darkness Enthroned, Shroud, and Lightpoacher of any socket amount. 40% of them are using squires, and there's really not many. No one's even level fucking 100 in all of Settlers, because it's not like a meme, but we're like on the cusp of meming. We're on the precipice of memology. Now, you could see the large array of jewels like we discussed. Most of them are going to be quad flat damage to some amount. This is a very common array. And then, of course, a unique and probably a magic in here somewhere. Yep, there's the magic. To kind of cover all the bases of Bubonic and also get ourselves as much as we could do. 2 socket there, 2 socket there, 2 socket there. There's your darkness. And if you wanted to, there is a fossil to slap an abyssal socket on a rare, but then you're fossil crafting, and that's really, really rough. So this guy is doing Frostblades. He's doing Frostblades in a different way than we talked about, because we talked about the Squire way. This is very similar, using Elder Gloves, which have a very similar thing, being socketed fast attacks, socketed flat fire, socketed equivalent of like running crit multi being the 70%. So this is your pseudo 6-link-ish, and he's running Frostblades because we have so much flat. It's attack, it's crit, it just gets all the benefits of the things we're talking about. And he has an incredibly low life pool because he doesn't have much flat on any of his shit, but you could get a lot higher flat, and he's using a basic LE attack build. For his Lightpoacher, he's got Bone Chill in Innervate to do some sort of debuffing and some sort of supplemental stuff, plus Yoke because he's going Tri-LE, which is why he's running the Taming, and things like Trinity. So this makes it really easy to alleviate the gear pressure, not having to worry about specific damage types. It's just, I'm running, you know, all of the elements because it's easy to get all of the elements when using a billion jewels. Tinctures for supplemental damage, Paradoxica for that fat fucking double because he has so much flat, so let's just double it. So this is one route. This is like an attack route with melee. Now we're going to get to the... Yeah, look at that wall. It's like a fucking sea of blue. It's like fighting Harbingers in Ritual League. This is the other side. You can see the magic one, and there's the unique, which that takes care of the bubonic prerequisite. And then just a fucking ton of goodness and flat. And he's running some of the 6-socket corrupted ones like we showcased from the Atlas tree. So that's like where you're getting extra value from those. And it's just a pile of yummy caster goodness and kind of like efficient jewels. Any amount of stats, it's just so much stats. So many jewels. So he's using a Shaper Wand to get an extra 1, 2, 3 artificial sockets, plus the Squire, meaning he's on a 9-link, and still gets the benefit of all the abyssal sockets from the things. He's also using the Command of the Pit, we talked about, which the Arcane Surge on hit does work nicely with the Kurgel's Gaze, so that huge chunk of additional percent effect on the Arcane Surge, and then all the bells and whistles that come with the thing. Light poachering for him is interesting. He's using Archmage. So large amounts of mana is being added as flat to his Spirit Burst through Archmage. So that's like one fun way, I guess you could support that. The traditional way we used to do it was like the Awakened Fork and GMP, but this is a fun, interesting route. It looks like he's doing EK also. Here's a guy doing Wild Strike. Again, it's a attack build that doesn't care so much about what kind of damage type. You'll see a lot of them doing things like Wed, Trinity, Multi-Strike as their kind of spiel. And then just the same suite of a fuck ton of different supports and a different, supplemental damage from all the Abyss Jewels and all their glory. Interrogation for the alternate status effects and Secret of Suffering, so the shock, the brittle, that sort of stuff. And he's opting for no Abyss Gloves and just going belt, boots, body, and hat. This guy is also doing Wild Strike, very simple and similar setup as the Wand guy, but this one's not using a unique, he's using a Shaper Elder Claw, just like the Wand guy, with additional support. So he's got Maim, Ruthless, Multi, and 40% more. So he is on a 10-link instead of a 9-link, which is just more link. This guy's opted for no Squire, and he's running his Lightning Strike on a 4-link in his body. So he feels like it's enough, but he's using Tombfist, so he actually has more Abyss sockets than through the gear than others. And then there's this guy who I think may have just like huffed too much paint, and he's gone full fucking schizo with a Marohi, but probably some sort of Freesia holdover. Either way, it's cool to see the setups. And finally, we have another guy who's a wall of fucking Abyss Jewels, and he's using Tornado of Elemental Turbulence. Similar situation. Again, triple Ellie, tri Ellie, like the Wild Strike, like a Wander, like a Lightning Strike, like a Reeve, like anybody using any of these things. You're just trying to use the white rice of abilities, using some sort of mechanism to convey all the amounts of flat you have, which you're gaining, and all the amounts of physical as extra elemental from the Lightpoacher. All that sort of stuff is where it's just being sent somewhere. So whether it's like an EK or a Lightning Strike or a Wild Strike or whatever, that's the kind of thing you want to use. But yeah, that's it. We kind of talked about all I want to talk about as far as Abyssal Uniques. We've went over what they are, where to get them, and the Abyssal Jewels themselves, a couple avenues when it comes to acquisition, and just some funky ideas. There's kind of no going wrong from a really baseline sense of if you just stacked enough Abyss Jewels and you played a build that is like either an attack or cast a spell or attack that does a physical to elemental conversion, or doesn't really care about its damage type too much, and you run some sort of Trinity setup, it's gonna feel fine, because you just have so many stats. You have so much coming from your Abyss Jewels, but it does take a lot to kind of ramp up. I really like the Kurgel's Gaze plus Command of the Pit. That's a fun little combo, so would recommend that one. And yeah, that's it. I'm Matt Lighty, and this has been having some fun time with Abyss Uniques, talking and such, and I'll see you guys next video. All right, Lighty out. Bye-bye.